go right in the middle, because otherwise you can't. It's not that we're weirdly intimate. It's just that because of the amplification, you can't actually hear each other on stage unless you're really close.
Although we are also weirdly intimate.
Also weirdly intimate, yeah. First question, actually. Everybody's expecting conversation about Octopus Energy, not unreasonably. But you also founded another business at the same time, which is a significant innovation in how the NHS works. Is that right? So I think it's fair to know about this, because to me it seems exactly the kind of way in which behavioural change and psychology can really improve efficiency at minimal cost.
Yeah, should I talk about that? Or?
Please, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so by the way, we sold a few years ago, so I'm genuinely focused entirely on meeting the needs of the energy sector. But we started a company called Consultant Connect, which was designed to improve the experience you have with a GP being referred to a consultant. So for those who know the British Health Service, you go and see a doctor, and if they think you need to see a specialist in a hospital, they write a letter, and 14 weeks later, you see the specialist in the hospital. It's a terrible process. You literally have 14 weeks when you don't know what's going to happen. And then 40% of the time you see the specialist, they decide you didn't need to see them after all. And they'll quite often send you back to the original doctor, who, by the way, may disagree. Anyway, but you're also wasting 40% of the most valuable, in terms of kind of availability, resource in the health service. The health service were aware of this. They did what any good, large organisation will do, and they created a new bureaucracy, which was, in some areas, the doctor would write to the consultant, but that letter would get looked at by a new department whose job it was to decide whether to send it to the consultant or not. So often a doctor would suddenly they can't even send you to a consultant because a bureaucrat has decided it's not allowed, which is even worse. So what we did was we took a lesson of, it's called subtractive thinking. How do you remove a step or bureaucracy? And so what we did was create the simplest possible interface. We created a database of the consultants, got to know all of their executive assistants so that we got their exact availability timetable. And then when a doctor wanted to refer you to a consultant, they would just they'd phone us, and we would put you through to the appropriate consultant. Literally, the doctor would phone up and he'd be like, press 1 for cardiology, 2 for dermatology, and so on. So
that's in the presence of the patient?
The patient's in the surgery.
Yeah.
And so the consultant can ask questions. They can say, do they seem responsive to this? And the most common response is the consultant says, I don't need to see this patient right now. Please will you send them for the following tests, and then give me a call back. And the patient gets instant, appropriate treatment. The GP gets feedback from the specialists. They've got job development and job satisfaction. And the specialists don't waste 40% of the time seeing people they don't need to see. We've treated 3.5 million patients, or been involved in 3.5 million patient treatments. It's built this incredible data set, because every call is recorded, encrypted, analysed by AI. So you're able to build a great data set. And the entire service would pay for itself within 6 weeks of implementation, and it now covers 2/3 of the NHS.
This is incredible. Show of hands here, actually. Which of you, when you go through a X-ray machine at airport security, which of you actually make the effort to pull the trays along as far as they can possibly go, so as many people in parallel can... Okay, you are the good people in the room, okay? You're the systems thinkers. Because what tends to happen in any system is people optimize at the individual level without looking at the overall system. So it's very clear that one of the major causes of a bottleneck in airport security is that if people grab their luggage as soon as it emerges from the X-ray machine, only one person at a time can actually put their belt back on, retrieve their shoes. If you actually haul the trays along right to the end, okay, you can actually do the thing in parallel rather than in series. But what's interesting is a lot of highly intelligent people don't think like that, because it requires a completely different framing. This is absolutely a brilliant idea, and presumably the consultants love it because they can then work from a golf course. I mean, without stereotyping medical consultants, of course.
Well, actually, it's interesting, because the original thing, the NHS is really keen that it's a local consultant, because they know the local rules. I don't know why medicine varies by region, but anyway, that's how they work. It meant occasionally calls weren't answered. And so we built a backup network of consultants around the country. And the thing we had to do there was solve the insurance policy. How are they still insured when they're answering a call from outside? But once we solved that, we were able to build this network. And we've now got a national consultant network that can answer any question. And they get paid something that's extremely modest by health service standards, but attractive for a 5-minute phone call. And they do indeed work from their golf course and patients benefit.
This is exactly the kind of creative idea which I think you've also brought, this nice segue here, to the energy sector, in that one of the things you clearly saw is that part of the solution to clean energy is behavioural change. So I had a very strange experience. About 20 years ago, I was sitting at a weirdly eminent group of people, one of whom was a major energy expert. And I simply made the suggestion, look, there is a significant gain to be had if you can simply change the time when people consume energy. So put your tumble dryer on 11 o'clock at night. It's probably nuclear powered. Put it on at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It's probably producing quite a lot of CO2, okay? And the guy looked at me as if I was nuts, okay? So I basically went, okay, I've clearly got this wrong. I'm talking shit here. I didn't mention the idea for another 15 years because this guy looked at me as if I was insane. It was only 15 years later that I realized that energy people don't look at people as part of the system. They're trying to optimize for the technology. They're not trying to optimize for the behavior. And the fact that he looked at me as if I was nuts was that this lay outside his remit. I wasn't actually wrong. It's just that he wasn't thinking this way.
Yeah, so I think there's a few things there. First of all, I think traditionally in energy, the word customer actually meant meter, not a human being. And you see that when energy companies report their customer numbers. There used to be literally the number of meters they serve. So if a house has got 2 meters, they called it 2 customers. And their systems were the same. If you wanted to move house with someone, you first of all detach them from the meter and then found another meter. So, the thought process, and look, I don't blame them at all. The system is fundamentally different now. Technology is different now than it was then. But if you think about the way that they interacted, instead of sending you an email with your bill in it every month, you'd get a quarterly or annual letter, or if you got an email, it would say, log onto our website and download the PDF. And it would be an impenetrable PDF, right? And if you phoned them, you'd go through, you'd have those IVRs that are so bad, they'll say, which department do you want? And you go, billing. It says, putting you through to metering, all right? What's your name? Greg Jackson. Greg Johnson. They just didn't want to talk to their customers. And in fact, call deflection was a major KPI. How many calls can you avoid? And of course, when we started the company, people said, look, no one wants to talk to their energy company. And it was like, well, they said no one cares who their energy company is. They just want the lights to come on. He said, well, look, I don't know. I look at water. Evian and Perrier are 700 times more expensive than tap water, and yet they've built a great brand because they meet people's needs at a certain time. If you can do that in something as mundane as water, we're the third biggest outgoing for people. Surely we can build a bigger connection. And by the way, we're the single biggest cause of, not our company, but our sector, single biggest cause of climate change. If we can't get at least some people to engage differently. And so on your question there, Rory, the energy sector said, look, no one's going to change their energy consumption at different times of day. It's too much hassle. And you said, well, it's a lot less hassle to put your dishwasher on at 8 p.m. rather than 6 than it is to switch from buying baked beans to sausages because they're on offer in Tesco. And yet millions of people switch their purchase behavior every day, changing their actual recipe. I mean, I can't make a recipe up on the spur of the moment. And it's not that everyone's the same. A civil servant said to me, well, I just want to do the washing when I do the washing. I said, well, that's cool. I don't buy stuff on special offer in Tesco because I'm a shit cook. But plenty of people will. And the idea really that we can say, look, we've got the technology now with smart meters and phones and everything else to be able to say to everybody, look, a great example we've got is there's areas in the east of England where there are so many solar panels that on a sunny day, there's not enough grid to shift it from the local area to the national area, and so we pay those solar farms to turn off. And instead of doing that, we've done a deal with the local network.
Repeat this for sheer wackiness. You pay a solar farm on a sunny day, and presumably a wind farm on a windy day occasionally. You pay them to turn off because they're overloading the grid.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
And by the way, you then pay a gas generating plant the other side of the grid
to turn on,
right? And so you could have had free electricity from a solar farm, but instead you're paying for no electricity, and then you're paying for the gas and trashing the planet by design of our current system. Today we spend 2 billion a year as a nation doing it. By 2030, it'll be £8 billion a year, right? 100 and odd quid a household. 10% of electricity bill, 15% would be wasted like that. But what we did was we wrote to customers saying, on sunny days, we can give you free electricity, sign up here. And just in one little area, I think like 60, 80,000 people signed up. And on average, on a sunny day, they use 400% more energy in the afternoon than they did before. Now, of course, you can say, how can someone use 400% more energy? That's mad. But there are plenty of people who'll do things like they'll save up their washing. Like, washing is one of the most expensive uses of energy. And so you could literally just say, look, I'll pile it up and do it all on the sunny afternoons, and it's free. There's other people who do baking. There's other people who'll basically not use their oven except... basically, there's plenty of people who can adopt habits that are no effort at all and save them money, and they make the system better for them. But not just better for them, they make it better for everyone else, because no one else has got to pay to turn the solar farm off.
Just a note, by the way, you don't have to fill your dishwasher absolutely to the brim before you turn it on. If you want to help the planet, turn it on when it's 7/8 full at the right time of day. Well, I mean, that's an easy behaviour.
An amazing consequence of renewables is if you're doing it on renewable energy at the time it's been generated, energy efficiency doesn't matter. It literally, there's zero carbon, right? If it's coming from a solar farm next to you right now, and the alternative is turning the solar farm off, use it.
So one of the reasons you're so important, I think, as a business, in terms of what other businesses can learn from you, is that you treat price like a marketer, not like an accountant, okay? So one of the greatest ways in which you can transform behavior is by experimenting with different forms of payment. And that doesn't mean people pay less, it simply means they pay differently, okay? And it's an extraordinarily interesting area for experimentation. Most organizations seem to decide price on the basis of a kind of cost plus, as you said, okay? It's a very, very simple backwards thing. Consequently, you never learn anything because you price to everybody in the same monotonous way. You had a wonderful thing, which was a tariff you created, which was effectively, if you were within a certain distance of a wind farm or any kind of air turbine, wind turbine, when the blades were turning, you got 20% off your electricity, and when they were turning at full speed, you got 50% off.
Yeah, the idea of that was that, look, time and again, people like me and politicians will tell everybody that renewables are cheap, and yet our bills keep going up. Like, literally, people don't believe it because, they're not seeing that benefit. So we thought there's nothing more transparent than if you live near a wind turbine, we give you cheap electricity when it's windy. Now, what we expected was that people would use more electricity at those windy times. And by it's not hard, you don't have to check your app, you literally look out the window. If the trees are moving, or indeed you can see the blades moving, it's cheap. It's really, really easy. And again, you can do your washing, charge cars, whatever. But the thing that we hadn't expected was we've now had 41,000 communities and individuals have asked for wind farms near them, right? So what it made us realize was in the world of big infrastructure, things like wind farms, in theory, people love it, but when it comes to being near them, you end up with NIMBYism. And we've never created forces for YIMBYism, like yes in my backyard. And the question really is like, ultimately, all this infrastructure we all want to build is designed to serve society. So how can you make it particularly useful and attractive for those who are closest to it? And those 41,000 communities, like the great tragedy for us is that things like the energy market is so heavily regulated, it's very, very hard for us to react to it. But we can at least prove this force exists. And we've now done it in loads of countries. And obviously, consumers are basically the same everywhere in the world. Everyone loves KFC, everyone loves Apple, and it turns out everyone really loves cheap energy, particularly if it's clean.
So the interesting thing there is that the traditional approach to the location of wind farms wouldn't take local preference into account at all, okay?
What they do, they try and buy off a local community by building a scout hut or a swimming pool. And the problem with that is it's not related to the commodity. And my inspiration here, by the way, was when I was growing up, I lived in a small town in the north of England, which was sort of on the outskirts of Middlesbrough, a bit pretty. And Asda wanted to build a big out-of-town supermarket. And the community had this decision. Do we want access to 30 or 40,000 cheap products that Asda are bringing, but along with that, we'll lose some fields and get a bit of traffic and maybe damage our town centre? And it was a decision for the community. We either get what Asda are giving us, or we choose to forego it because we like what we've got already. It's not like, buying us off by giving us a scout hut and forcing an Asda on us. And in the same way, I thought, look, what we want to build is cheap, clean energy, the community should have the decision. Do they get cheap, clean energy, and in return, we'll build some wind farms in fields nearby? Or do they say, hey, look, we'll forego that, in which case it's not as cheap and it's not as clean?
So interestingly, you also had a tariff, I think, where at certain times of day you'd be paid to charge your car. And just as evidence of the behavioural change, what you noticed happening was people rang up their friends and said, look, my car's already at 90%. Do you want to come round and charge yours at my house?
So an interesting consequence, of renewables is, look, on days when it's sunny or windy, you increasingly get these periods of negative pricing. And people in the industry think this is a problem because they're like, how can you ever make money when your commodity is negatively priced? But actually, if you think hard about it, this is the corollary of the expensive energy when it's not windy and not sunny. So if we don't let people benefit from it, they get the downsides but not the upsides. Now, what we found is just if we pass through those negative prices, it was astonishing to see just how much reaction there was to it. But also from a business point of view, look, surely there's no better business model than being paid to fill a battery and then be able to discharge it later at premium prices. And I think it's just that creativeness of the more you understand your own supply chain, the more you can find ways to either create value for yourselves and your stakeholders, and even more importantly for your customers.
So you've also got this incredibly, talking about that battery storage thing, you've got this incredibly innovative price now where you have an electric car for a flat price, which includes all the electricity for the car, on the condition that you plug the car in and it's available at moments of peak demand. Your car battery is actually feeding out rather than sucking in. It's with BYD, is that right? The BYD?
Yeah, BYD, but we'll do it with others too.
Okay.
And this, I'm conscious this risk is getting very energy focused.
It's hugely innovative.
So we can talk, exactly.
Sorry.
No, the interesting bit here was that, look, you'll see in the media all the time, they'd love to write negative stories about electric vehicles. But the reality we found is that as long as we can choose when to charge the car so we can use cheap electricity to do it, it is 6 times cheaper per mile than petrol. 6 times cheaper. So around the world, you see fuel price protests, gilets jaunes. Politicians are obsessed with it. And yet I haven't heard a single politician who understands that the answer to this is not subsidies or ending the tax on fossil fuels, it's electric cars. They should be filling their boots with electric cars to solve this problem for consumers. But the interesting thing is if the battery goes both ways, i.e. if we can discharge it a little bit, we can literally give you free driving. Like we give 13,000 miles of free driving per year if you've got an electric car with a bi-directional battery and you plug it in at least 20 times a month. And that's because what we can do is we can buy super cheap electricity from the grid when it's windy, sunny, or off-peak. We can then sell a little bit of that back to the grid at the peak times when it's very expensive. And then with the money we've made from that, we buy a little bit more of the cheap stuff for your driving. And we do all of that without you noticing. It's automatic. And of course, the primary job of a car is getting from A to B. But if we can enable you to get from A to B much more cheaply, that's what people want. And we take this all the way now. So we visited China in September, I think, and we worked with BYD, the big Chinese manufacturer of electric cars, to specify a particular way of doing this. That means we can now offer a car that's £299 a month, including as much driving as you want. I think there might be a limit, actually, but anyway, it's certainly a lot more than I drive. And I think this kind of idea about saying, like, this is a game changer. You could never do that with petrol. And finding all these ways in which the new solutions are not like, we're not asking people to compromise. We're literally providing an upgrade because of the technology. The technology, it's a bit like so much technology started because of the space race, then became really useful in society. Loads of this technology started because of climate change, but it's now just better for everyone. It's just that we need to bring those benefits to people in a sector that normally hasn't had the kind of customer connectivity to do that.
Do you think there's a slight problem with effectively the tonality of a lot of environmental protest is one that has a natural revulsion to consumerism, and therefore it's hair-shirted, and there's an optimistic message which is a future for our children or indeed for our older selves, which is one of abundant clean energy, and that the upside hasn't been sold because people are too busy condemning what you might call any form of kind of energy consumption in any shape or form. What's your take on that? Because I've always wondered about that. I've always thought that, well, I'll come on to this later, but I've always thought that there are actually selfish reasons to be green,
Yeah,
which are never communicated.
By the way, I reckon we've got about 500,000 customers who've discovered those selfish reasons and now living a life where they don't pay energy bills. They've got solar panels at home, they've got batteries, an EV, a heat pump, and they're literally living a life 5 times cheaper than everyone else that's more comfortable. And we need more people to discover that, and we need the markets to enable it. But look, I think one of the greatest tricks of things like the fossil fuel industry is telling consumers it's your problem, here's the sacrifices you need to make. And I think, honestly, we shouldn't let them get away with it. The reality when you're inside the energy sector is you can if you work hard enough, find solutions that let people live the life they want to live without having to wear a hair shirt. Now, if people want to wear a hair shirt, that's fantastic. But if we tell people that's what they're going to have to do, most people will vote against it. If they have to pay more, they'll vote against it. So if we want to change the climate, we've got to make it easy for people and not to tell them they have to change their life. Now, there's an interesting thing when it comes to things like flying, right? You'll say, well, look, you can't decarbonise flying, so we all just have to cycle next time we're going to Berlin. And I think that's also unhelpful, because the reality is, if we decarbonise the things we can, like 90% of driving in the UK would be better switching to EVs, right? It would be better for the driver. It would be cheaper. It would be easier. There wouldn't be problems with range. The average UK commute is 9 miles. If you're driving 300 miles, you definitely need to stop for a pee anyway, especially at my age. And if you've got kids, you'll need to feed them. So there are very few use cases now where an EV is not better. And they're basically the same price to buy and dramatically cheaper to run and to own. Like I've had EVs 7 years. Total servicing cost, £120. So that's the world we should be in. And if you do all of that, it's a bit like saving money at home. If you're saving money on a bunch of stuff, you can then afford to have a holiday. And in the same way, if we save carbon on the stuff that's easy, we can then afford to use our carbon budget on stuff like, people being able to go on holiday.
I mean, actually, interesting fact, by the way, the really valuable data point with EVs, they're very similar by analogy, I would argue, with the British acceptance of automatic transmission, okay? Everybody argues about it for 15 years, but no one who gets an automatic car ever goes back, okay? Fair? Okay, anybody? Okay, a couple of people. Okay, fair enough, okay? Totally valid decision.
And by the way, automatic cars are shit compared to EVs, right? You put your foot down, you wait half an hour, and it finally lurches away from the lights.
Yeah.
With an EV, you tickle the accelerator, and then you have to strain your neck, right? Honestly. But very briefly, what I did want to say, this thing about energy efficiency, we relentlessly ram home to households how they have to be more efficient, creating a world that feels like a trade-off between doing the right thing for the planet and ease of living. And then we have an energy system, which I just said, by 2030, we'll be wasting $8 billion a year paying wind farms not to generate, paying solar farms not to generate, paying gas plants to fill the gaps, and so on. Building thousands of kilometres of pylons we don't need. That's what we're building. And I think it is incumbent on politicians and industry to be dramatically more efficient before we basically we're lazy and take the easy path and then force households on paths that require them to make sacrifices that mean eventually they turn their backs on us.
One of the weirdest things, actually, is that government tends to approach problems in this order, okay? Legislation, i.e. forcing people to do something. Number 2 is economics, bribing people to do something. And only if those two fail do they resort to persuasion, okay? Now, you don't have to be a libertarian nutter, okay, to realise that's probably the wrong way around. You should start by seeing what people are willing to do simply through persuasion, then, if necessary, encourage them financially, and only then resort to compulsion.
Exactly the wrong way around.
Exactly. Now, a few things. You're obviously trying to cut us short, are you?
No, I'm going to ask some questions from the crowd when you're ready.
Just one final point on this.
Yeah.
One thing Greg and I are massively aligned on is that quite a lot of what is driving government policy is driven by engineers who are obsessed with the perfection of the most efficient solution, okay? Now, just to give an example, I go to an electrician and say, I want to install an electric car charging point, and he goes, the wire out of your garden is too long, you can't get 7 kilowatt hours. So I give up on the whole idea. And then I ring up my brother who's an astrophysicist, and he says, you don't need fucking 7 kilowatt hours. If you could just throttle it down to 4, given how much you drive, there are no circumstances in which that's a problem. Okay? Similarly, you can only get a grant for a heat pump if you rip out your gas central heating and replace the entire system with a heat pump which heats every single room of your house. Now again, my brother, who understands the physics of all this, is installing air conditioning units one room at a time, okay? Now, what you may not know is an air conditioning unit is also an air-to-air heat pump. You can run it in reverse. And since he lives in the UK, not Tunisia, he uses it 9 times as often as a really efficient way of heating his home, okay? And only in periods of very, very high heat, like yesterday, does he use it as an air conditioning unit. It's a great solution. Government grant he gets for that, 0, okay? This is ridiculous because you're effectively making the perfect the enemy of the good. And I think that's what happens, because the behavioural change that my brother's asked to engage in is really small, it's a gradual process, and he gets a little bit of a benefit, which is you don't die of heat stroke in the 7 days of the year which are intolerable, okay? The only acceptable government approach is basically you dig up your garden. And that's basically taking a policy and not factoring in ease of behavioural change in any way, shape or form. It's simply ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, look, very quick. I mean, look,
okay.
It is amazing. On heat pumps, they'll pay you $7,500 to get one, but only if you jump through 1 million hoops. Some of which mean that it takes typically 8 to 20 weeks to get a heat pump. Given that 2/3 of gas boilers are replaced because your current heating system's not working, they've eliminated 2/3 of people who want a new heating system from being able to access it. So on one hand, they'll hand out a fortune, on the other, make it basically so unbelievably difficult to get that, there's sort of, you've got two ends of the government fighting each other. The one that wants to be perfect versus the one that actually wants this policy to work.
Got it.
Great. I'm going to jump in with a quick question. How important will nuclear energy be for the UK's future energy mix?
How important will be?
How
GB
important?
energy.
Yes. Nuclear energy, yes.
Okay, so nuclear energy, right? Nuclear energy is great. It's low carbon. The problem is we live in a country that can't build a fucking railway line, right? Now, building nuclear reactors is difficult. And I see there's a representative here from EDF who do that. It's not because you're not good. The French are brilliant at building nuclear reactors, but the British regulatory environment and the British political environment and planning environment mean that,
do you want a solution?
Hang on, they take far too long to build and they're far too expensive. And by the time we built them, we could have built loads of wind farms and solar farms. So they're great, and we buy your nuclear, thank you. But we really do have this incredibly cheap, easy solution as well, and we shouldn't be waiting for nuclear.
Do you want a
Is that all right, by the way?
Do you want a behavioural solution to that? Put the fuckers on ships, right? Move around the ports of Britain and plug in for 6 months at a time. No one minds. Build a nuclear power station in someone's backyard, they're bothered. We've already had 400 sailors sleeping 10 feet from a nuclear power plant for the last 40 years in the shape of submarines. None of them seem to have suffered any ill effects, okay? So one solution is, if you make them mobile, there's no NIMBY problem. So, I think there are lateral solutions to this which we're not exploring enough.
But honestly, we should just...
Is that nuts, by the way, or does anybody agree with me?
Just to be really clear.
Okay.
So nuclear is fine, but we need to be far better at it than we are. Some other countries have done it very, very well. And I think Britain's got this incredible problem with planning and bureaucracy that makes all big infrastructure hard. We should be going all out on onshore wind and solar power as the cheapest forms. Offshore wind's okay, nuclear's okay.
The other problem with nuclear is an architecture problem, which is we built the French just bang a nuclear power station on the outskirts of town, right? In Britain, we put them in really spooky coastal areas and made them look like the headquarters of a James Bond villain, okay? The architects didn't do a great job there. If you'd had a mock Tudor nuclear power station in Britain, no one would have minded, okay? Just a tip to any nuclear power station architects out there.
Gents, I've got a call sign there, but it's been an absolute pleasure hearing you both in conversation. Greg and Rory, thank you very much. Round of applause.